I found my daughter in a cafe with a woman I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, and neither of them looked guilty. They looked happy. My name is Lisa, and by the time any of this happened, I had been living in Portland for 3.5 years. I moved there after the divorce, which is a word that doesn't really capture what it was. Kevin didn't just leave. He left for someone else, someone who already had 2 boys with him, which meant the relationship had been going on long enough for there to be a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old by the time I found out. He took most of what we had, disputed the paternity of our daughter Mia, and made it very clear that he had no intention of supporting either of us financially. I didn't fight him on the money. I didn't have the energy, and honestly, I didn't want anything from him, not even what was rightfully mine. I packed what I could, I took Mia, and I started over. Portland was nobody's suggestion. I just drove until I felt far enough away, and then I stayed. I found a small apartment, found a job I was good at, enrolled Mia in a school she eventually loved, and built something that felt, after a while, like an actual life. Mia was 10 when we moved. She adjusted better than I expected, the way kids sometimes do when they don't have the option not to. She made friends. She joined a drama club. She became the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it feel warmer. I was proud of her every single day. What I didn't think about very much, because thinking about it didn't help anything, was Dorothy, Kevin's mother. She had been a constant in my life for almost a decade, and I had genuinely liked her, which was its own kind of complicated loss when everything fell apart. She sent me one message after the divorce, just to say she was sorry for what her son had done, and I didn't respond because I didn't know what to say. After that, there was nothing. I assumed she had stayed on Kevin's side, which was the natural thing, which was what mothers did, and I let the silence settle into something permanent. Mia never mentioned her, or at least I thought she didn't. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in October. It was a woman from the school office, and she said it calmly, the way people say things when they don't realize how alarming they sound, that Mia had been picked up after school by an adult woman, which was unusual because Mia always walked home. And they just wanted to make sure everything was all right. I said yes, of course, thank you, and hung up and immediately called Mia's phone. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent 3 messages in a row and watched them sit unread, and for about 20 minutes I was in the particular kind of panic that only parents know. The kind where your brain starts running through every worst-case scenario simultaneously, and you can't stop it even though you know you should. And then Mia called back. She sounded completely fine, slightly breathless, a little distracted, and she said, "Mom, sorry, my phone died. I'm at a cafe. I'll be home by 6. I asked her who she was with. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. She said, "Grandma Dorothy." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Okay, I'll come find you. Send me the address." I drove to the cafe without knowing exactly what I was going to say when I got there. I wasn't angry, which surprised me. I was something else, something quieter and harder to name. I parked, walked in, and there they were, Mia and Dorothy at a table by the window, a pot of tea between them, and what looked like the remains of 2 slices of cake. And they were laughing at something, really laughing, the kind that takes over your whole face. Dorothy saw me first. The laugh faded and she started to stand, and I could see her preparing for something, bracing herself. I walked over and sat down in the empty chair at their table. Mia looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she wore when she wasn't sure which version of me was about to show up. I looked at Dorothy and I said, "How long have you been in Portland?" Dorothy sat back down slowly. She looked at Mia, then at me, and then she said, 3 days this trip. But I've been coming for about 3 years. I heard that and I let it settle. 3 years. Mia had been 13 months old when we moved to Portland, which meant Dorothy had found us when Mia was still in primary school, had been coming regularly, had been sitting in cafes and walking in parks and doing whatever grandmothers and granddaughters do together for 3 years, without me knowing. I asked Mia how often. Mia said, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. Sometimes more in summer. I looked at the 2 of them sitting there, at the easy way they occupied the same space, at the half-finished tea and the cake plates and the way Mia's hand was resting on the table close to Dorothy's. And I thought about all the Wednesday afternoons and summer days I had been home assuming Mia was somewhere ordinary, and she had been here, with this woman, building something I had no idea existed. I asked Dorothy where she was staying. She named a hotel about 8 blocks from our apartment. She said she was a regular there, that they knew her by name at the front desk. She said it simply, without apology, the way you state a fact you've long since made peace with. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know if you'd allow it. After everything Kevin did, I thought you might not want anything connected to that family anywhere near Mia. And I couldn't bear the thought of being told no. So I asked Mia first, and Mia said yes, and I told myself I would tell you eventually. But eventually kept not arriving. I looked at Mia. Mia looked at the table. I said, "You could have just asked me." Dorothy said, "I know. I was a coward about it. I'm sorry." There was a long pause. Outside the cafe window, the street was doing its ordinary afternoon things, people walking, a bus going past, the particular gray light of an October day in Portland. Inside it was warm and smelled like coffee and something baked, and my daughter was sitting across from her grandmother looking like she was waiting for a verdict. I said to Dorothy, "Where are you staying tonight?" She said, "The hotel." "I leave Sunday." I said, "You're not staying at the hotel. You're staying with us." Dorothy looked at me. Mia looked at me. Neither of them said anything for a second. Then Mia said, "Really?" I said, "Really. Go get your things, Dorothy. You're not paying for a hotel room when we have a perfectly good couch." Dorothy laughed, a short surprised sound, and then pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. When she took it away, her eyes were wet. She said, "I wasn't sure you'd ever want to see me again." I said, "I wasn't sure either. But here we are." We drove back to the apartment together, Dorothy in the passenger seat and Mia in the back talking about something that had happened at school that week. Some drama with a group project that I had already heard about but was happy to hear again because the way she told stories had always been one of my favorite things about her. Dorothy asked questions and laughed in the right places, and I drove and listened and thought about how strange it was to have this woman back in my car after 3.5 years. How familiar and unfamiliar it felt at the same time. At the apartment, I made tea because it felt like the right thing to do, and Dorothy sat at my kitchen table and looked around at the space. At the photos on the wall and the plant on the windowsill that Mia had named Gerald and the general organized chaos of a life built from scratch, and she said, "You've made it really nice here." I said, "It took a while." She nodded. She understood what I meant, and she didn't try to say anything about it. Mia disappeared to her room to do homework, or at least that was what she said, and it was just Dorothy and me at the kitchen table with our tea and the particular quiet of two people who have a lot of history and aren't sure where to start. Dorothy said, "I want you to know that I never excused what Kevin did. Not once. What he did to you and to Mia was wrong, and I told him so, and he didn't want to hear it, and that's between him and his conscience. But you were part of my family for 10 years, Lisa. And Mia is my granddaughter regardless of what her father chooses to be." I said, "I know that. I think I always knew that." She said, "I should have called you directly. Right at the beginning. I should have asked you properly instead of going around you. That wasn't fair to you." I said, "No, it wasn't. But I also could have reached out. I didn't because I didn't know how, and I think part of me assumed you'd chosen his side." She shook her head. She said, "I haven't spoken to Kevin in over a year. He made choices I can't support. But that has nothing to do with Mia." We sat there a while longer, just the two of us, talking about small things and then bigger things, about Mia and how she was doing in school and what she wanted to do with her life and all the things that accumulate in 3.5 years of a child growing up. Dorothy had been watching it from a distance, catching glimpses on afternoons after school, and I had been watching it from up close, and between the two of us, we had a more complete picture than either of us had alone. At some point, Mia came back out and asked if she could watch something, and Dorothy moved to the couch and Mia curled up next to her in that automatic way, like it was something she had done 100 times, because apparently she had. I sat in the armchair across from them and watched them watch television and thought about all the things I hadn't known and all the ways people find each other anyway, even when the official channels have closed. Before Dorothy went to sleep that night, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said, Thank you for tonight. I mean it. I said, come for Christmas. Both of you should be in the same place at Christmas. She looked at me for a moment. Then she smiled, a real one, and said, I'll book the flight tomorrow. I said, don't book a hotel. She laughed and said, I won't.